go, merry-go-round, round with ya. In and out, then up and down, down, down. It's getting old, going around, round with ya. Think I need some solid ground, merry-go.
Let's go. Let's hot. Ooh, that's cold. That's hot. Let's go.
This video is a follow-up tutorial to the pattern making for this jumpsuit style, and I've broken this particular video into these chapters so it's easy for you to follow and pace yourself. So please refer to the chapters to find out exactly where you are. The materials I'm going to be using are as follows. My main fabric is this black and white Ankara print. I'm going to be using 3 yards in total, and this fabric is from Reme Fabrics. Thank you so much, Reme, for gifting me with this gorgeous print. I'm also going to be using 1/2 meter of plain black cotton for the waistband. This is just simple cotton drill to match the black and white Ankara. I also have a short invisible zip. It was about 30 centimeters to go on the center back, and then I have 2 meters of bias tape to help me finish the neckline of the jumpsuit, as well as some ribbon. I have a satin ribbon here, but I ended up using a velvet one because it had a nicer weight for the back neckline. Using the patterns I made from the previous tutorial, I have pinned those patterns onto my fabric, and I'm going to be cutting out the waistband pieces for the front and the back. I'm also going to be cutting out the jumpsuit, the top, and the trouser pieces. If you want to add pockets, you can actually cut a simple inseam pocket and add it to the side seam, but mine doesn't have pockets for this particular project. I'm also going into notch all of the points where I have notches, which is just cutting a small incision, so corresponding patterns I know where to match them. When a garment has a lot of pieces, I find that adding notches really takes away the guessing game of where should pieces connect. Once the notches were in, I went ahead to actually fuse the waistband with some interfacing. If your fabric is really thick and stiff, you don't need to do this, but the cotton drill was a little bit floppy, and I want the waistband to have some structure and hold its shape around my waist. But I fused the front and back waistband, and then I just pressed all of my pieces ready to be stitched together. I'm going to start my construction with the top front, and for this top front, the first thing I'm going to do is actually finish the front neckline before sewing up the center front edge. So using my bias tape, I'm going to open it up, and then I am sewing on the right side of my material with the bias tape on that edge, and then I'm going to go back in and fold the bias tape twice towards the wrong side of my fabric. This is how I'm going to be finishing the neckline for the front and the back edges, because this jumpsuit is not going to be lined, but I want a really nice and clean finish on the neckline of this piece since it's going to be visible. So I did this for the left and then repeated it for the other side before going back to stitch the center front edge. And for this particular side, I'm doing a French seam, so I'm sewing with wrong sides facing each other first on a 0.5 seam allowance, and then I'm going to fold it again with wrong sides on the visible side of me, and then I'm going to be sewing it so I have a clean finish on the inside and on the outside. So this is just a quick summary of how French seams are done, and it's a seam type that you could go for if you don't have an overlocker and you want a beautiful seam as well. So this is what the front is looking like so far, really nice and tidy. I gave my piece a press just to relax all of the stitching before going ahead to pleat away the detail on the waistband. Now this is not very visible on my project because I'm using print, but if you're using a plain fabric that is on a softer side, this detail will drape very nicely on the front bodice. So I'm pleating it away, and the pleat is facing the sides. I'm doing this on the left side, and then I'm going to do it on the right side as well. So this is ready to be joined to the waistband of my jumpsuit. Now I'm going to grab the waistband for the front, and I have a pair of those. I'm going to take one side first, and I'm going to join it in such a way that I have the top edge of the waistband connecting to the hemline of my front, and it's a bit tricky when you're joining two curved edges, so I recommend you pin the middle and the sides first, and then if you've notched pieces, you just match the notch on the waistband to the notch of the hemline of the top, and I promise you it will fit. It looks like it wouldn't fit right now, but because both edges are the same distance, they are just shaped differently. If you distribute the ease equally, everything would connect in the way that it's supposed to. So I'm going to grab the other side, and I'm going to be sandwiching the hem of the top basically between the two layers of the waistband. This way I'm hiding the seam inside of that particular edge while connecting the waistband to the hemline of my top. So I'm going to take this to my machine, and I'm going to be sewing, remove my pin, sewing, remove my pin, distributing ease where necessary, checking I'm not stitching parts that I'm not meant to be stitching. And once I make my way to the end, I'm going to do a reverse or back stitch to secure my seam. I went ahead to give this particular stitch a press, and it really looks so beautiful already. Now that I'm done with this particular step, I'm going to set this to the side, and I'm going to go ahead to work on the front trouser, which is going to connect to that top front that I just connected. The trouser has darts along the waist, so I'm going to be transferring the dart points from the pattern onto my fabric by piercing a pin through that dart point, and I'm going to be marking the point with a chalk on the wrong side of my material. I'm going to mark this for both pieces of my front trouser, and because I have notched how wide the dart is along the waist, I essentially just need to pin those notched points together and then fold it until I reach the point that I just marked with a chalk. So once I have these darts marked and pinned on my front trouser, I'm going to be taking this to my machine. I'm going to be sewing away the darts on the front before sewing up the center front edge using the same French seam technique. You can just sew an overlock if you have an overlocker, if you don't want to, I don't know, waste time in a way by doing French seam. But on this particular day, my daughter was sleeping and I didn't want to wake her up with my loud overlocker, so I just did the French seam and it worked really well. And the good thing with the French seam is if you do it and it's pressed away nicely, you don't see that overlocking thread coming through on your fabric, especially because this fabric is white and my overlock thread for this particular project was black. So and then ended up being a good decision on the long run. So I'm just going in here to stitch the second side of the French seam process, which is you first stitch with right sides facing each other, you fold the seam the other way, and then you stitch with the other sides facing each other, so you have a clean finish on the wrong and on the right side of your seam. After ironing the darts and relaxing all of those stitching on the center front edge of my trouser, I'm going in here to actually connect the waistband to the waistline of my front trouser. Now this is the point I had wished I had kept the waistline of my trouser straight, because I think it would have just made construction a lot easier. So I'm just going to be sewing in two steps. With the first one, I'm going to be connecting one side of the waistband like so, and once I'm done doing this, the other side that is still loose and free, I'm going to fold it over this particular seam to hide the stitching. So I'm going to be stitching on the right side of my fabric or of my jumpsuit, and I'm going to be folding, sewing, folding and sewing. If you want more accuracy, you can actually press this first, pin it, and then go ahead and do your stitching. It will just ensure that you have an even cleaner finish. Now this is what the front of the jumpsuit is looking like. Everything is turning out really clean and beautiful, and that I'm going to set aside to work on the back. In the same order that I did for the front, I'm going to work on the neckline and then work on the waistband, connect that to the trouser before adding the zip. So I'm going to be finishing the back neckline using the bias technique like I did for the front, where I fold open the bias and sew it on the right side of my material, and then I'm going to go back in and fold it twice to conceal that edge and give me a clean and tidy finish on the neckline of my piece. I'm going to do this for both sides, so for the left and for the right top back pieces, and ensure that the bottom edge you have enough seam allowance to attach your zip later on. Once I was done working on the necklines, I'm going to be attaching the waistband pieces to the hemline of my top. This was really straightforward because both edges are straight, so I'm just going to be sandwiching the top back pieces into the waistband. sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm going to do this for the left and the right sides of my back. And once I was done doing that, I actually went ahead to press everything and set it aside so I could work on the back trouser pieces. This one still has a dart, and I'm just going to be transferring the dart with a pin and a chalk technique, so I know I'm stitching the dart to the exact place that I want it to be on my back trouser. This I'm going to be sewing using a regular straight stitch for both pieces of the back trouser of the jumpsuit. So I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to be sewing away the darts up onto the point that I marked with a chalk on both sides. And once I was done doing that, I know these trouser pieces are ready to be connected to the top, which has the waistband already in place. That I'd already pressed and set aside, and I'm going to be pinning them together along the waistline of the trouser into the bottom edge of the waistband. This I'm going to do in 2 steps to just ensure for a much cleaner and tidier finish. And at this point I noticed a slight error, which I would show you guys later on, but at this point I'm just going to be sewing one side of the waistband first, and then I'm going to go back in and fold the other edge of the waistband to conceal that seam. Now you can see on the top edge that the waistband is a lot wider compared to the waistline of your trouser, so when you're doing your pattern, just ensure that that bottom width of your back waistband and the waistline of your trouser, especially on the back, they are the same, because you can see mine is just a little bit wider by about 1 inch, so double check that. But thankfully I was able to trim that away, and what was left would still fit my waist in a comfortable way, so I ended up still being able to use this particular piece, which is why I'm just emphasizing that you double check your patterns before you cut onto fabric. So once I'm done fixing that error, I'm going to go ahead and overlock the center back edges, because that's where my zip is going to be. I have a black invisible zip which would just be tucked away nicely on the back of the jumpsuit. It would allow me to wear this jumpsuit as well, so I'm able to zip it down, get in, zip it up, and it's already in place. So I'm going to grab my invisible zip and I'm going to be pinning it into the center back edges that I just overlocked. I'm going to fold in the top edges, and this I am going to be stitching it in such a way that it goes from the top into the waistband into the top edges of my back trouser. So with one zip I'm able to get into this particular piece. So I'm just pinning both sides of the zip tape into the back of my piece, and then I'm going to be sewing it using a zip footer. I have a dedicated tutorial showing how to sew invisible zips. I'm going to link it on the screen if you want a tutorial that is really specific on how to sew in an invisible zip for the best outcome. After sewing up the other side of the zip tape to the back edge of my jumpsuit, I'm going to be sewing close the bottom edge, and this is the sort of like the bottom crouch of the back trouser, and this is going to be stitched up until the very point that my zip ends. This ensures that the zip is closed on the bottom, and this is what it looks like, looking really nice so far. I just need to double check that I stitched this correctly, and so far so good. I am pleased. I know this is ready to be connected to the front of my jumpsuit. I did the assembly this way, so if I had to go back and stitch close or open up the side seams of my jumpsuit, this particular construction method makes it possible, where you have the front and back pieces as independent panels, and then you join them up on the side seam, on the shoulder, and then on the inseam. It's easier to make amendments or adjustments as my body changes with time. So I'm just going ahead now to join the shoulder seam of my jumpsuit, so connecting the front and the back pieces along the shoulder. I'm also going to be sewing the side seams from the bodice all the way to the trouser, as well as the inseam, before going ahead to overlock all those seams afterwards. To finish up the jumpsuit, I'm just going in here to roll the hem of the trouser. I'm rolling it twice and stitching it. I went for a smaller fold because I don't have a lot of seam allowance on the hem of my trouser. I also did the same finishing technique for the sleeve of the jumpsuit, the sleeve hem. So I just rolled it twice and I stitched it down. And this I'm going to press to relax all of the stitching. Once I was done hemming all of the edges, the final step is to add the ribbon on the center back edge. When I actually tried it on at this point, I could almost not even add the ribbon. It stayed in place, but I just thought the ribbon was a nice touch and it will just prevents the neckline from slipping and sliding when I have it on. So I'm going to put my ribbon 1/2 inch below the shoulder seam, and I'm just marking that exact point using a pin. Before grabbing my ribbon, I went for a velvet ribbon which has a little bit of weight and it just has a nice luxurious feel. This I'm going to pin into the back neckline edges, and I'm going to be stitching it up, trying to put it along that same seam on the center back, on the back neckline. So this I'm going to be sewing up to finish up this project. So on the left and on the right hand side, give my piece a nice press, and this is what the jumpsuit looks like all done. The first thing I noticed when I had it on was how cool the black waistband, how cool the effect was. It also gave the illusion of a slimmer waist because it's a black dark panel around the waistline of the jumpsuit. It almost has like a traditional Japanese belt that is tied around the waist. It has a very similar vibe, even though that wasn't intentional, but it turned out that way, and I'm not mad at that outcome. I wore this jumpsuit out on a day out with my family, meeting up with friends. It was so comfortable. It was also easy to just undo the ribbon and back and feed my child, which made for a very functional and easy wear. So I'm happy so far with the outcome. I hope you guys will try this out for yourself. Feel free to make any changes to suit your preference as you desire, and if you do recreate this, don't forget to tag me on social media at Kimday Designs. And until next time, have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.